Ever wonder how the classic rock legends made their solos sound so unforgettable? They all rely on chord tone soloing, a powerful method that turns simple licks and scales into timeless lead lines. So, in this video, I'm going to show you the secret chord tone moves that George Harrison, Mick Ronson, and Brian Setzer, and 6 other classic rock icons used so you can unlock the same magic in your own playing. First up is Gary Rossington. At the heart of Lynyrd Skynyrd's triple guitar attack, Gary leaned on chord tones to craft solos that felt lyrical yet powerful, always serving the song, never overplaying. Let's check it out. You probably know that Gary Rossington, founding member of Lynyrd Skynyrd, died earlier in 2023. His play is a perfect blend of blues, country, and rock, and it's a masterclass in chord tones, appropriate for players of all skill levels, beginner to advanced. So let's check it out. Growing up in Detroit in the 1970s and being heavily influenced by a cousin who is 10 years my senior, I grew up on a steady musical diet of the Beatles, the Stones, Led Zeppelin, The Who, and a handful of others. But eventually I started listening to FM radio too, and one day I was over a buddy's house who lived a few doors down. Now he had a great record collection, or actually it was cassette tapes. Anyway, he pulled out a cassette, tossed it over to me and said, "You gotta hear this." My first thought was, how the heck do you pronounce this? Luckily, it was right on the album cover. Yep, Lynyrd Skynyrd's first album, pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd. It's a hilarious title, and it's got some great songs on it. Gimme 3 Steps, Simple Man, and of course, Free Bird! But what really blew my mind is they had not 1, not 2, but 3 guitarists in the band who played lead. What? But Gary's style is really the focus of this video. Stylistically, he was influenced by players like Albert King and Duane Allman, and heavily by Eric Clapton, but he was not a carbon copy. For one thing, he didn't feel the need to shred all the time. He didn't just play that rock, blues, country blend that Southern rock is famous for. He could play melodically, his secret sauce, and that's what we'll focus on. Now, he played some great guitar solos, but one that's really instructive for players of all levels is Tuesday's Gone, another beautiful song from that first album. So let's have a quick listen to that opening solo and then break it down. It's all about chord tones and phrasing. So melodic and instructive. Because it's so slow, you can hear every single note clearly and focus on making them sound good. Now, a lot of people explain this by just saying, hey, it's all in A major pentatonic and just leave it right there. But that is not the whole story. Gary emphasizes chord tones. If you listen carefully to this solo and the rest of them in the song as well, you'll hear that he lands on a chord tone on beat 1 of the chord. Let's look at it in detail. Here's the first line. That line ends on an A, which is the root note of the first chord, A. Here's the second line. That line ends on an E, which is the root of the second chord, E. Here's the third line. That line ends on an F sharp, which is the root of the third chord, F sharp minor. And here's the fourth line. That line ends on a D, which is the root note of the fourth chord, D major. But you don't have to land on the root note of the chord. You could land on any note in that chord, as you'll see. So that's Gary's secret sauce, chord tones. Now, learning scales is great, but if you can pair those scales with chords, you can connect to the music in a much deeper way. Next up is George Harrison. George wasn't about flash. He built his solos on melody and chord tones, giving every Beatles song a sense of grace and direction. If you're enjoying this and you want to play with the confidence of the rock legends of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you might want to check out my 4-course classic rock guitar bundle. On sale now for a limited time with a 20-song bonus pack. There's a link in the video description. Now let's get on to George Harrison. Who's the most influential guitarist of all time? Well, I'm not sure, but George Harrison's name really stands out, and with good reason. He knew how to take a simple part and really make the song. Today we'll cover one such song, and we'll talk about why George's part really stands out. I was indoctrinated into the Beatles when I was a boy of, 5 or 6 years old. And one of the first albums I ever heard was Abbey Road. There are so many good songs on that album. Come Together, I Want You, that long medley of songs on side 2. But one song that really stood out for me at the time was Octopus's Garden. I'm sure it had something to do with the fact that I was so young when I heard it. It feels kind of like a children's song, both in its lyrics and in its music, which kind of has an innocent quality to it. And only later did I learn that Ringo wrote it after being on Peter Sellers' boat, and it kind of was an escape fantasy for him. But as time passed, I realized something else was lifting the song for me, and that was George's excellent guitar playing in it. He had such a knack for coming up with great hooks and catchy lines. Yes, puns intended. So let's have a look at George's part and why it fits the song so perfectly. Right off the bat, George sets the tone of the song with this guitar line. This uses the extended major pentatonic scale in E, and it goes like this. Now, I learned it as called the sliding scale because it has slides between the second and third notes. Right there, and then again. Now, here's what was played a little more slowly. It's a nice sea shanty-ish beginning to a whimsical song. Now, most of the song is what's called a 1-6-4-5 in E, and those are the chords E, C sharp minor, A, and B. Now, if you're not familiar with the 1-6-4-5, it's also the so-called doo-wop chord progression. And it gives the song an innocent feel to it. But for the guitar solo, which is what we'll cover now, there's a key change. It's still a 1-6-4-5, but the key transitions to A. These are the chords for the first half of the solo. Now here's what George played, more or less, and why it works so well. Just as before, George uses the extended A major pentatonic, but this time it's in A. So here's what he plays over the A chord. Now, that's in the A major pentatonic, and it's got this playful bend, but notice that he ends on A, which is a chord tone in A. And then over the F sharp minor chord, he's got this kind of playful rhythm, again still staying in the extended A major pentatonic. And then over the D, he plays this. Notice he ends his note on that A, which is a chord tone in D. And then finally on E, he ends on an E. So it's really just using that A major extended pentatonic scale and being very mindful of the chord tones. But I think even more important than that is George really captures the playfulness of the song, and I think is intentional with that key change, making us think that we've gone under the sea and we're playing around with the octopus and his friends. I think George captures that perfectly. But in the second half of the solo, it's similar, but it also transitions back to the original key of E. Let's see how George does this. Here are the chords in the second half of the solo. It ends on A, and then it transitions back to E through B and then E. And here's more or less what George played in the second half of the solo. So George played the second half very similarly to the first. But then a simple solution to end it. Just ending on an A over that A chord. And that leads us right back to the original key of the song, and Ringo starts singing again. It's as if George took us down under the sea for a brief swim and then brought us gently back up to the boat. Simple genius. With David Bowie, Mick Ronson was the king of glam rock guitar. His solos were dramatic, often driven by strong chord tone choices that cut right through the mix. In this segment, Mick shows us a simple solution for what to do when there's a sudden key change. It's right out of the chord tone playbook. There were a few famous 70s rockers named Mick. Mick Fleetwood, and of course the one and only Mick Jagger. And there were also a few famous guitarists named Mick as well. Mick Ralphs of Bad Company, Mick Jones of Foreigner, Mick Jones of The Clash, and of course Mick Taylor, also of the Rolling Stones. But there was another who was perhaps even more important than any of those. We'll uncover his genius and a couple of his secrets that you can put into your own play. My formative years, music-wise and guitar-wise, were the 1970s, and I was highly influenced by a cousin of mine who was 10 years my senior. He introduced me to the Beatles, The Who, and Elton John. In fact, Rocket Man is the first album rock song I remember hearing at my cousin's house. How cool is that? Such a great song. But a little while later, he introduced me to Bowie's music. The Man Who Sold the World, Hunky Dory, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust, and Aladdin Sane. What really caught me, besides Bowie's really unique singing, were those glam guitar riffs. Riffs like this one. Or, being a Detroiter, I like this one too. And another one that grabbed me was this one. And of course, this one hits everyone pretty hard. One of the coolest riffs ever. So great, pure Mick Ronson. Yep, that's who I'm talking about, but you already knew that, didn't you? Such a great player, and that sound of his was exactly what Bowie needed to transform him into the glam rock star that he became. A perfect match. It's an underappreciated match, too. Kind of like Jagger and Richards, Plant and Page, May and Mercury. It's right up there with them. A match made in rock heaven. But Mick wasn't just Bowie's guitarist. He was a classically trained musician and much sought after studio musician. In fact, he played with Lou Reed, Pure Prairie League, and even Morrissey, to name just a few. But what really strikes me is that he probably could have become a guitar hero of the highest order. If you don't believe me, listen to Width of a Circle or She Shook Me Cold from Bowie's Man Who Sold the World album. Or perhaps even more shocking is the alternate take of Elton John's Madman Across the Water that Mick plays on. Amazing, and I put links below if you want to check it out. But Mick didn't take that route. He went all in for making the songs memorable instead of showing off how he could shred. That's good news for us too, because it means we can play his stuff and learn from it, and that's our focus today. Let's take Suffragette City, a great song for its simplicity, yet it has a simple guitar secret that we can take away, maybe even a couple. Let's start by looking at the chord changes. Here's the chord progression, and at first blush it's pretty simple. Starts off in A, and then it's got this change in the second bar, F and G, that almost faints like it's going into A minor, but comes back to A major again, and it repeats that. And that kind of makes it difficult. What scale are you going to choose over that? And then we also have this B in here, which throws a monkey wrench into what scale you're going to choose as well. So the normal scale choices I would have taken at the time of A major or A minor pentatonic are problematic. But here's how Mick solved it. Simple genius. It sounds good and it's easy too, but only if you think in terms of chords, not just scales. For example, let's look at the main hook. It starts on an A and he plays this, the third of an A chord. Then it goes to F and he plays this, two notes of an F triad. Then he plays this, two notes of a G triad. So you really don't need to think about scales at all here. Just outline the chords in an artful way. This is an incredibly powerful idea, especially when the key is dancing all over the place. But that's not all. There's another trick that Mick used to make the song sound even better. It's something that he helped make common, and you'll hear it all over the place from the 70s onward, notably by Boston and still today. Here's a little bit closer to how the song actually sounded. Yep, two guitars playing almost the same thing. It's such a simple solution that we hardly even notice it. We only hear the improved sound. Next up is a studio legend from Muscle Shoals, Pete Carr. His chord tone phrasing made even simple chord progressions sparkle, blending precision with soul. Let's see how his iconic but simple solo helped turn this next song into an all-time classic. A reminder, if you're enjoying this and you want to play with confidence like the rock legends of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you might want to check out my 4-course classic rock bundle. On sale now for a limited time with a 20-song bonus pack. There's a link in the video description. Now let's check out that all-time classic solo. I never knew how to make my guitar solos connect with an audience until I discovered this one technique. Now sure, I knew my scales and arpeggios, but I just kind of noodled around. Well, today I'm going to take you through a famous solo that's perfect for putting all of it together. When I was a fledgling guitarist, a long time ago now, I got serious about learning guitar. Inevitably, that led me to learning about scales. First the minor pentatonic, then the major scale, and even the modes. But even though I learned a lot, my play still sounded kind of random, especially when I improvised. Even though I had decent chops, and I knew my scales all over the neck, I always sounded like I was just playing scales, like a robot. It was a problem, one I know many guitarists face. My solution at the time? More scales. But lucky for me, fate intervened. One of my favorite albums as a kid was Bob Seger's Night Moves. It was one of the first albums I bought myself, and as a native Detroiter like Bob Seger, I still love it. It has songs like Night Moves and Rock and Roll Never Forgets. But the song that captured my attention guitar-wise was Mainstreet. Of course, everyone knows that iconic guitar intro played by Pete Carr of the famous Muscle Shoals rhythm section. But it's the main solo to the song that really taught me the lesson I needed. Now, before learning a solo, it's always important to know the chords you're playing over. Here, we're playing over a D, a C, a G, and an E minor. Now, the chord sequence D, C, G, and E minor is played 4 times in the solo section, and the last time it doesn't end on D, but it ends on B minor. Now, all of these chords, D, C, G, E minor, and B minor, are all in the key of G, with the home base being D or the last time B minor. So you could use the D major pentatonic, which is essentially the same as the B minor pentatonic, or you could use the G major scale with a tonal center of D, which for you fans of the modes is called D mixolydian. But that's what I used to do in the old days. Just pick a scale and then start meandering. Start nowhere, end nowhere. In other words, the dreaded noodling. But that's not what Pete Carr did. If you listen to the solo, it all sounds very intentional, and in fact it is. So instead, we'll look at the solo using another lens as well. We'll use the scale that we choose, but also we'll add in the chords. We could choose the G major scale / D mixolydian mode, but let's keep it simple for today and use the D major pentatonic / B minor pentatonic. And this doesn't just work in position 1, it works for any position, so we could add the notes of the second position if we wanted to as well. Now, we'll do something very simple that few people bother to do, but it's totally worth it. We're going to envision putting the chords in the scale. Now, this may seem difficult, but it becomes easy once you do it once or twice. It's really not that hard. And there's a secret I'll share with you at the end of the video, so make sure to watch. So, here's the D major pentatonic. Now, here's the first chord, D. Fits right in there. Here's the second chord, C. Note that the C and G notes aren't in the scale. That's okay. Here's the G. And here's the E minor. Very similar to the G major chord. And we could do it for position 2 as well. For example, here's the D chord. And here's a G chord. So what does this do for us? Well, it shows us where to end our lines, where to resolve things so we don't sound random. It's kind of like putting a period on the end of a sentence. It makes things understandable for the listener. Let's see how Pete Carr did it in his awesome solo. Here's the first run through the chords. Let's understand this by looking at the notes that Pete sits on, the sustained notes. The very first one of those is the very first note of the solo, this right here, that A. It's part of a D chord, and that's the chord that's playing at the time. It's a chord tone. Next, we're going to play through this D to get to the C. When we arrive at this note right here, that's the first beat of the C, and guess what? It's part of a C chord. Next, we're playing to the G. And again, the note that we end on, the note that we sit on, happens on the first beat of a G, and it's part of a G chord. Those are all called chord tones. Next, we're going to play through the E minor to get to the D. And we're at the next chorus of chords, if you will. But there's an interesting pattern going on here. Pete played a chord tone on the first chord, a D, a chord tone on the second chord, a C, a chord tone on the third chord, a G, and then he played through the E minor to get to the next chord sequence, starting at D. That gives a solo a coherent whole. Let's see how he does it for the rest of the solo. Here's the second time through the chords. All right, that first line plays through E minor to get to a D. That first note that we sustain on is an F sharp. That's part of a D chord. Next stop is right there. That's an E. It's part of a C chord. That note right there is part of a G chord. Now we're going to play through E minor to get to that D. And there it is, a note that's in a D chord. And he keeps going in a similar manner. If you want to see the whole solo, I've done a lesson on it, and it's linked in the description. The whole solo is simple and brilliant, but do I think that Pete Carr was thinking about the chords or even the scale when he was playing? No way. I think he was using his ears. But that's the secret. Do this a couple of times over some famous solos and you'll notice two things. Number one, great solos use chord tones. And number two, your ears start to sink in with the chords that are being played. Brian Setzer. He brought rockabilly fire and technical precision to chord tone soloing, mixing jazzy runs and crisp bends to create lines that always landed on the money. When I was younger, I always had trouble figuring out Brian's solos using scales, but chord tone ideas show exactly what's going on. Let's check it out. Do you feel like your playing doesn't flow the way you want it to? I get it. I was there too, struggling with that same frustration. But for me, learning one type of music made a huge difference and changed everything. Believe it or not, that was 1950s style rock, and in particular, one song, Rock This Town by Stray Cats. We'll see what made the big difference coming right up. I grew up listening to the Beatles, the Stones, and Led Zeppelin, and players like Clapton and especially Jimmy Page. But I was in awe of some of the players of the 1950s, like that guy who played the solo on Rock Around the Clock, Danny Cedrone. How did he do that? And then there was Brian Setzer, who took the style to a whole new level in the 1980s. At the time, I figured it was out of reach, and anyway, I was into blues rock, so why not just play that? But when I finally learned Rock This Town, I realized I was missing out on something that made my life a lot easier. So I want to share that with you today. But before I get to the solo, here are some simple takeaways to keep in mind as we go through it. Now, these are important because it's the best way to play fluidly by keeping it simple. First, players of the 50s often used really simple chord progressions, like for example, this 12-bar blues in D that's shown here. Very common in the 50s to use progressions like this. Second, there's no fancy scales. Usually just minor and major pentatonic are used, and usually just in position 1. But the key is to combine them in the same place. Here's the D minor pentatonic, and here's the D major pentatonic in the same place, the fretboard. And now here they are combined. Now, that's a lot of information to sink in, a lot of notes. So to simplify it, just focus on one area of the fretboard. Like, for example, this based on the E-shaped D chord right here. Some people call this position 1. There's a lot of mileage you can get out of just that one position. One last thing is that when in doubt, just play the chord. If there's a weird chord change, or even when there isn't, you can always play a rhythmic idea around that chord. Something simple like... All right, let's check out Rock This Town and see how all these ideas come to action. First thing we'll want to check out is the chord progression. Here we can see it's not quite a simple blues in D, but it's similar to it. We'll start out with 6 bars of D, and then 2 bars of A7, the 5 chord, back to the 1 chord, D for 2 bars, and then we've got a couple of interesting things here. We've got 1 bar of G7, the 4 chord, and then we've got a bar of E7. That's kind of an oddball chord, before it goes into the turnaround section for the last 4 bars, D7, A7, and then 2 bars of D to end it. So as we'll see, Brian Setzer is going to follow the chords. Okay, let's start out with the D licks because that's how the solo starts. So it starts out like this. And this is just a combination of the major and minor pentatonic in this position 1. So I'll take a slower look at it and you'll see that that's exactly what's going on. Okay, and now we continue, still playing over the D, and you'll see it's still that combination of major and minor pentatonic while we're kind of outlining the chords. Again, combination of major and minor pentatonic, and occasionally like outlining a chord, like this chord right here, that repeated line. Yeah, it's hard to play that fast, but it should be pretty clear what's going on right there. Believe it or not, that's half the solo already. Now it gets kind of interesting because we've got those interesting changes coming up. How did Brian handle those? So now we've got 2 bars of D followed by a G7 and then that E7. Very interesting. First, the 2 bars of D, that should be no great shakes. We're just going to do the combination of major and minor pentatonic right here in position 1. That's exactly what happens. Pretty cool line though. Now we've got the G. Remember when I said when in doubt, play a chord? Well, that's what happens right here. That's just a little triad chord, right? And we're playing something interesting around that. Now we've got that E7. What's going to happen over there? Well, here's what I think he played. Now what is this? This is really just 2 notes in an E7 chord, right? That's being played over and over, which is pretty neat. See what I mean about just playing the chord when in doubt? It makes life really simple. It's not so hard to play that fluidly. And that E7, what scale do I play over it? What's going on? Don't need to know, just play the chord basically. All right, let's see how he ended it. All right, the last line is just basically a D to an A, back to a D again, and here's what he chose to play. Okay, this line right here. That's really just right out of a D major pentatonic. And, you know, even in here, we could also combine the major and minor pentatonic in this position. But let's just keep it simple for now. So if you're feeling stuck, this 50s style, along with its simplifications, can really help you out. Like Rock This Town helped me out. John Fogerty, what can you say? His playing with Creedence was all about economy. Short, sharp solos, built usually from chord tones that carry the same punch as his riffs. Let's check out John's style. I recently went to a show by one of my all-time favorites, John Fogerty. He confirmed that he's one of the best players to listen to and to learn from, no matter what level of play you're at. I'll prove it to you today. I got to see John Fogerty just a little while ago on a celebration tour, and it really did seem like a celebration. He's got his songs back, he's got his 2 sons in the band playing with him, and at 79, he could still rock the stage. Very inspirational. At one point, my wife turned to me and said, "He really still can play." And boy, can he. He played all the old stuff, plus he even did some Van Halen-style tapping on his intro to Keep On Chooglin', and the dual guitar solo that he and his son played on The Old Man Down the Road, just awesome. So here are 5 things that you can learn from John Fogerty, no matter what your level of play and no matter what your age for that matter. And make sure you stick around for number 5 because that's the most important of all, and so few guitar players even care about it. And yes, the plaid is intentional. Number 1, he plays great intro hooks. Sometimes the difference between an ordinary song and an extraordinary song is just the guitar intro. And John is right up there with the best of them. Here's an example. Or this one, a total classic. Those intros turn what would be ordinary chord progressions into memorable songs. They're simple but effective and creative. Not everyone can do that. Number 2, combining chords and lead play. John was great at creating natural sounding lines that basically came out of chords, not scales. Here's my favorite. I love that one, and I've got a secret to share with you about that song at the end of the video, so stick around. Number 3, those swampy riffs. He has great swampy riffs. In a sense, he invented them for rock and roll, morphing them from earlier blues and early R&B. Here's just one of his many examples. Again, super simple, but just so memorable. You instantly know the song by just hearing that one lick. It's also really impressive to me how he takes such a simple solo and makes it really memorable too. This line right here. Or you can play it up here. Those are just the notes of the pentatonic scale, but if you add a little bit of a change in rhythm, all of a sudden it's a memorable line that you'd recognize, oh yeah, that's from Green River. That's a big thing that we guitar players can take away. We often concern ourselves so much with the notes that we play, but not how we play them. John Fogerty really knew how to use rhythm creatively, and it shows here. Number 4, he's a storyteller. I don't just mean his lyric writing, which, by the way, is great storytelling. I mean storytelling in his guitar playing. And one of his best, a masterpiece in my opinion, is his storytelling solo on Born on the Bayou. There's a link to a performance and a full lesson in the video description, but we'll just cover the themes here. And there are many, and that's important because this is pretty much all over a single chord, so you have to have some ideas to move it along. The first one is this really hypnotic. Really cool. The second one is this theme of double stop sixths. Then there's a couple of triads that are played. And then finally, the main theme, which is this theme of bass notes. Really cool. And then finally, he transitions back to the song to give the listener the cue that this is going to happen again. Truly epic. It's not difficult to play, but those lines are just so compelling. Lots of people can play licks, but very few people can play like that, taking you all around the bayou with that solo. Number 5, he understands and cares about his listeners. Do you know that song? I bet you do. And it's not an accident, it's because it was made that way. It was made for us. We who have listened to his music for 50, 60 years and loved it. He told us at the concert over and over that we're the ones who helped make his dreams come true. It's not just music that's made for guitar players, it's made for people who love his music. There's a lesson there that we guitarists can take away for sure. And then there was Leslie West, Mr. Tone. With Mountain, he used that thick, thick tone and chord tone targeting to make his solos just roar. Simple, direct, and devastatingly effective. Let's check out Leslie's style. When people talk about great guitarists, you rarely hear the name Leslie West, yet he was hugely influential. Pete Townsend, Slash, and even Yngwie Malmsteen were fans. Here are a few of his best tricks, ones that you can easily add to transform your play. Back in the early 90s, a buddy of mine from work and I were talking about guitars all morning. We decided to take the afternoon off, and we went down to a local video store, takes you back a bit, and we were looking for concert footage. We found this video called Night of the Guitar. It had Alvin Lee and Steve Howe and Robbie Krieger on it, and a bunch of other guys I knew just a little bit about. Anyway, we listened to the beginning, and I have to admit I wasn't really into it. But then this huge man walks onto stage with this thick New York accent, and he dedicates his performance to his first guitar teacher, Barry Manilow. Needless to say, it was Leslie West. Now, of course, I knew Mississippi Queen, and I didn't really know anything else that he did, but that was the first time I really heard Theme for an Imaginary Western. If you don't know that song, go listen to it. Great song, written by Jack Bruce of Cream, and it's got not one, but two of the most beautiful solos in all of rock. They just sing. I became an instant Leslie West fan. All right, let's learn some of his tricks using the famous Mississippi Queen. His first trick is a famous one, and he's not the only one to use it. Clapton, Page, and a whole slew of others used it as well. But it's so good, you just gotta know it. It's a specific trick using the major and minor pentatonic in the blues. Here's a standard 12-bar blues in E, the sort of thing that's used all over blues and blues rock. Now here's the trick. Over the first 4 bars, you play the E major pentatonic, and then over the rest of it, you play just the E minor pentatonic. And you can transpose that to any key. Now, many people are familiar with the E minor pentatonic scale shown here. And one simple way to get the major pentatonic is just to move the minor pentatonic pattern down 3 frets, and you get the major pentatonic shown here. So those are the 2 scale patterns. Let's see how Leslie used them in the solo to Mississippi Queen. Hopefully you could clearly see how I simply shifted up as the riff changed from E to A, and then I stayed in that position for the rest of the solo. That's the beauty of Leslie West, simplicity. But that brings me to his second trick, phrasing. Now, phrasing is usually defined as how you play the notes rather than which notes you play. And it can involve all sorts of things like timing and dynamics and effects like slides and bends and vibrato, so it can get confusing. I kind of wish they just put a picture of Leslie West there and say, play like this guy. Again, this is so clear in the Mississippi Queen solo. He only plays a handful of notes, but he varies them enough to keep it really interesting. For example, the first 2 lines are, and again, then the third line is almost identical, but it's slightly different. Notice the timing is a little bit different, and the fourth line has identical notes to the first 2, but the timing is different. And then you'll notice this other little affectation that's done on this line. Notice he pulls off and trails off to this note. He doesn't play, which he could do, but this is just a little bit different. Because he played so few notes, he had to rely on phrasing to sound unique and get his point across. Great players like Santana, Brian May, and Jeff Beck could do this as well. And that brings us to a third trick, one that every guitar player has access to, but few actually try to use it. It's about standing out. Let's hear a quote from Leslie West in 1987. If you take 100 guitar players and put them in a room, 99 of them are going to sound the same. The one who plays different, that's the one you're going to remember. I learned that you should think about the song, think about the chords you're playing behind. Most of my solos come right out of those chords. Now that's music to my ears. Pay attention to the chords, play chord tones, and focus on how you play those notes. Brian May might be the most melodic of all the classic rock greats. His multi-track guitar songs often boil down to simple chord tones, melodic, singable lines that sounded like another voice in the band. Let's check it out. He wasn't one of my first guitar heroes, but a friend from England introduced me to Queen in my late high school years, and I became an instant Brian May fan. Good thing too, because he showed me some secrets I didn't learn from anyone else. My first guitar hero is Pete Townshend, followed quickly by Jimmy Page. I still love their playing today, and I learned a lot from them. But when a friend played me some Queen, and I'm not just talking about the hits, I'm talking about stuff like Brighton Rock from Sheer Heart Attack, I instantly became a fan. But especially of Brian May. Something about him just sounded different, and it wasn't just that guitar he was using. I knew I could learn some cool tricks from him. Anyway, a little while later I was able to borrow his Starlix video, the one that he did in 1983. It was really eye-opening, not just because of the licks that were in there, but also because of the little tidbits of wisdom that he dispersed along the way. Anyway, here are a few of the things that I think are important that I still use today, including the number one thing that I think that makes him distinct, so make sure you watch to the end so you don't miss it. The first things I took away were from their first album, off of Keep Yourself Alive. So uniquely Brian May. Well, what did I take away from it? The first thing was that galloping rhythm, and believe it or not, the key is the same key to playing funk rhythm. It's all about the 16th notes. Now, most rock is in 8th notes. So in a 4 count, we've got 8 divisions. So it sounds like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Pretty common, right? But here we've got 4 divisions for each beat. So that's 16. Sounds like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. And when we speed it up, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you just skip a beat every once in a while, you get that dum da da dum da da dum da da dum, the gallop. Like that. But also, it's one of the first times I encountered that rock double stop. Out of the A minor pentatonic, it's these. And you can bend them as well to get that nasty sound. But an even more important thing I took away was from the section on Brighton Rock. Now this is going to sound odd and maybe even a little bit controversial, but he didn't really know not exactly what he played. And what's more, he didn't even seem to care that much. Check it out. So here's a lick from Brighton Rock. And now slowly. But Brian clearly didn't know whether that was the exact lick he played on the record. For him, it was close enough, and timing was almost everything. For me, that was the first time I ever really understood why guitar teachers say, don't just memorize this lick. Don't just learn it verbatim, come up with your own variation. It's because when you do that, you don't have to memorize so many things, and you can play much more confidently. In a sense, all you really need to know is that you're starting from this high E, and you're coming down to this E, 2 octaves below, and you're going to play something bluesy in between. So for Brian, it was this. But it could be this. Not as cool as Brian's, but perfectly serviceable. So that was mind-blowing to me at the time, that he only approximately knew what he did. But what was even more mind-blowing to me was how often throughout the video he said he rarely used scales and that he mostly played through chords. Chords? But he clearly could play scales, so what was he talking about? Well, he didn't just say play chords, he said play through chords. So let's use his masterful solo to Bohemian Rhapsody to see what he was talking about. If we look at the chords to the solo section, they look pretty complex, but we can simplify them for soloing. Let's take that first line. We can simplify it to this. So we can do that because in that complex line, this one right here, it's really filled in mostly by the bass player, John Deacon, playing this. Harmonically, it's really just an F minor, then an A flat, then a B flat. These chords show the solo section is in E flat major. So Brian could have just used the E flat major scale, and he did use that scale, but he used it to play through the chords. So the first line is over the chords E flat, B flat, and C minor. It goes like this. Now, that's basically only 3 notes. It's this, which is the third of E flat, it's a chord tone. It's this, which is B flat, the root of B flat. And this, which is C, the root of C minor. So it's just jazzed up a bit. And that's why we often say it's not the notes you play, it's how you play them, right? It's all in the phrasing. So that was fairly easy to understand. Emphasize chord tones. But what does play through chords mean? So here's my interpretation. Whenever we play a chord for a while, like this C minor is being played for a while before we get to this F minor, we can use that opportunity to play notes in the scale, in this case a E flat major scale, over that C minor chord until we get to that F minor, and then we're going to sit on a chord tone. Like what Brian May plays is this. He plays that over the C minor, and then over the F he does this, which is just a bent note to an F. What could be simpler? Play an F over the F minor chord. And then he just continues in the same vein. For instance, on the next sequence, F minor to A flat to B flat. On F minor, we're playing through it to get to A flat, and we're using the E flat major scale. That C is a chord tone in A flat. And then because A flat isn't played very long, we just leave it there. We don't play through A flat. But then when we get to B flat, we play this. Or something very similar. Now, believe it or not, that is the simplest line there is, because it just, over a B flat chord, we start with B flat and we end in B flat. And just playing the E flat major scale between those notes. Again, that simple octave trick. So much to learn from just a few songs and a few Brian May tidbits. Oh, the #1 secret, right. He plays like a singer. But not just any singer, he matched Freddie Mercury. Here's an example. Singers know the notes that they need to land on, but they often have different numbers of syllables to sing, so they have to speed up or slow down their lines. Brian May did that in this line. But just understanding that you need to play chord tones isn't enough. You need to be able to visualize them all over the fretboard, and it's not easy. But I've made it easier for you because I've got a free Triad roadmap that you can download from a link in the description. It's totally free and it's in all keys, so go ahead and download it, and I'll see you on down the road. Of course, we have to come to one of the greatest names ever in rock, and that's Jimmy Page. Page often played loose and raw, but his instinct for landing on chord tones gave his solos their power and character. And of course, there's that one note in that one solo that's the key to so many players getting into guitar in the first place. You know the one. Let's check it out. What do these iconic lines from famous guitar solos have in common, and how can it make you a better guitarist? I'm sure you know that one. And how about this one? Or how about this one? By the end of the video, just a few minutes from now, you'll have the full story. I'm embarrassed to say it took me about 20 years to get the full scoop, but you'll have it in just a few minutes if you stick around. Let's start with the first line, perhaps the most well-known solo line in all of rock, the first line from the Stairway to Heaven solo. Now, I was a Led Zeppelin freak, so of course I knew the minor pentatonic scale. But this was a little bit different. It had a note that wasn't in there. That note right there at the end. And how different it would sound if we ended on a note in the minor pentatonic scale. That just doesn't sound right. So the question is, how did he choose that note to land on and not the note that was in the minor pentatonic scale? Now, I know a lot of you out there are saying, well, he was a genius, but I think to somebody who wants to play that way, that's just not an acceptable answer. If you're a little bit curious, you want to know more. So I kept going. I learned the major scale instead of just the minor pentatonic. And I learned to look at the chord progression to determine which major scale I used. So here we have the chords A minor, G, and F over the solo section. And that would lead us to pick the C major scale, which is the same notes as the A minor scale, to solo over this. Just to reinforce this, here's the A minor pentatonic scale. And now here's the A minor / C major scale. And you can see that that F note that Jimmy Page ended on is in the C major scale. So I figured that was case closed. I just play the C major / A minor scale and go on my merry way. That note was contained in there, mystery solved. But you know what? My improvising didn't get any better. I didn't sound like Jimmy Page at all. Now, I lived with that scale view for a very long time, thinking that if I picked the right scale, I could play any note in that scale and it was all okay. But it's just not true. Now, there's a super easy fix. It sometimes sounds complicated when you explain it, so I'm going to demo it first so you can see it. I'll briefly improvise 2 times. First time the way I used to, and the second time I'll apply the easy fix. And you'll see it sounds a lot different. Pretty awful, I know, but I promise you I was using a correct scale, the A minor scale. Now what I'm going to do is use that same scale, just make a tiny adjustment, and you'll see it makes a world of difference in how the solo sounds. Much better, right? What was I doing differently? Well, to illustrate it, let's learn directly from Jimmy. Okay, here's our A minor scale. Now, here's an A minor chord embedded in that scale. And now here's an F major chord embedded in that scale. Did you see how both of those chords were contained within that scale, within those scale notes? So you don't need to learn any new patterns. You just need to learn to emphasize the notes of the chords where they count. And they count most at the beginning and especially at the end of a phrase. So looking at Jimmy's lick, he begins on a chord tone of A minor, that E, and then he plays through G because G is just a middle chord, and he ends on an F, which is of course a chord tone of an F major chord. So wait, that's just it? I use the same scale I already know, but I emphasize the chord tones, especially on those changes where those changes really matter, like at the end. Yeah, that's pretty much it. To illustrate, let's take a look at the Carr's lick. If we look at the chords, it turns out that the E major scale is perfect for this, except for one chord, the G sharp. So we could use the E major or the E major pentatonic scale for this one, except for that one chord. We'll see what Elliot Easton does. Look at that last note, a C. It's not in the E major pentatonic, but it is in a G sharp chord. So you see, this works even if the chord is outside the scale you're playing in, and you didn't even need to learn any jazz. But these are just two examples. Now that your eyes and your ears are open, you'll hear it all over the place. Like in this great solo from the 1970s. It's so simple and compelling, and now you'll know why. You gotta check it out. So click on this video. I'll see you in that video, and I'll see you on down the road.